It's been a while since I've done any reviews for my little YouTube channel called The Cheese Remote. So I figured it's time to do something. Somebody pointed that out to me, Greg pointed it out to me, and of course it's just me being lazy. But I'm on vacation this week, and I've been binge watching Halloween movies. Undeniably my favorite horror film of all time. It's up there with a few of them. There's a couple that I really enjoy, but Halloween is probably, for me at least, the perfect horror movie. It is just amazingly made, incredibly well crafted. I never really get tired of watching it, and to this day, I swear I still notice little nuances about things here and there. Ignore the binging of my Facebook page. Chiming in, I'll turn that off. But I'm going through the series film by film, and because I'm just that kind of asshole that never watches anything half-heartedly, I have watched 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And when I say I've watched 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I have watched 1, the theatrical version. I have watched the extended version. I have watched with commentary, and I did the same thing for 2, the television version, the theatrical version, the commentary track. For 3, there was some commentary on it as well, but there wasn't too much in terms of deleted or extended scenes. 4, 5, I've watched both of those, and both with the commentary tracks as well. And I watched Halloween 6, which is what I'm going to review today, Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. For those of you curious as to what the DVD cover looks like, it's this. It's the poster. So, at any rate, I got to start off with a little backstory on some of this. Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, has a bit of a weird history to it. It's widely considered one of the worst Halloween films out there, and I get that reference for it. I get that frame. It's probably not the best film. It does have some redeeming qualities to it, but it's also a convoluted film in just terms of getting to what you need to see, where you need to see it, and how you need to see it. Because this is the film you got in the theaters. This is the film you got on VHS. This is the film you got on DVD. Unbeknownst to most of us who were not industry people, this film, which is the last film Donald Pleasence is in, I'll get to the plot in a little bit, but unbeknownst to us, the little setup I have to give is, the film was made, it was tested, it tested poorly, Donald Pleasence passed away, and then they went and refilmed many key scenes, and then which ended up being this film. Now, the original cut of the film had a vastly different storyline. You kind of get to the same places, but there's a lot that went on differently in the film, and through a few different airings on television, on regular television, a lot of those scenes had been put back in, or the earlier cut of the film was showed as opposed to the theatrical version, which became known underground as the Halloween 6 producer's cut, which you could get on eBay as a bootleg, which I have. I actually can't play it on my DVD player currently. It doesn't play it, I don't know. But at any rate, at any point in time, the point of it is it was a vastly different film. Sooner or later, eventually, Dimension realized the appeal of this underground cut and said, I need to cash in on it, and eventually released on Blu-ray, which I highly recommend you pick up. It was a very different version of this film. Very different version. I'll go into details more on that later. But let's just start off with the film itself, the actual film itself. The actual film itself continues the story that started off in Halloween's 4 and 5, which is basically the Jamie Lloyd trilogy, which is supposed to be the in-franchise daughter of Jamie Lee Curtis's character from the first and second film. There's a couple different timelines now due to retroactive films erasing different continuities and starting new ones. But this is the first realistic continuity the franchise had. The last film had been done, and there was a lot of... It wasn't well received. Halloween 5. Halloween 4, oddly enough, was very well received. People actually really love that film. It's one of my favorites, too. But Halloween 5 was not very well received, and there were a lot of problems with the production companies and film rights changing hands. And there's a pretty big gap between 5 and Halloween 6, or as it's otherwise known as The Curse of Michael Myers. And there's a big gap, and I think that left a lot of people upset and pissed off because Halloween 5 ends in a cliffhanger, and you don't get a resolve for that for something like 7 years later. I think you finally get a resolve in this, and the resolve isn't that satisfying. We find out that all these years since the mysterious man in black had liberated Michael from the police station at the end of Halloween 5, that he is being kept after, watched, helped by a group of cultists who are in the Smiths Grove Sanitarium called the Cult of Thorn. Now, Thorn is based off an ancient Celtic rune stones, which are kind of like an early alphabet, and they're good thorn. There are good rune stones and bad rune stones, light and dark. Of course, the worst of these being Thorn, which we have seen in the previous film, was now a mark on Michael's wrist, which he had never previously seen before. Just came up in the last film. But the concept of this movie was to stop, sit down, and say, we're 6 films in. We need to explain some things. We need to come up with a reason for some of this. It's a little ridiculous that Michael just, as an average human being, just goes out there, kills all these people, has these superhuman abilities, these strengths, this ability to recover from injuries, to kill, murder, maim, and there's no real reason for it. Now, don't get me wrong, I personally have always, and one of the things I personally have enjoyed about the first Halloween film is there is no explanation as to why Michael does what he does, and that makes it scary. Kind of like the birds. There's no explanation as to why the birds attacking the birds, they just do. So sometimes you don't need to explain something in a film to make it scary, and it actually makes it more scary, which is one of my pet peeves with the Rob Zombie versions of the film. I didn't need an explanation for Michael Myers. I didn't really care for one, and I didn't care for Rob's explanation of why Michael was the way he was. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I prefer the John Carpenter version that doesn't explain so much of it. Now, that being said, if you go back to the original Halloween novel, some of what is the basis for Halloween 6 is actually in that novel, because it actually starts off in Celtic times, where they kind of explain sort of, not entirely getting into the rune things, but they do explain that this has happened previously, and it's not the only time they mention it in the book, because they mention it in Celtic times. They also mention it happening, I believe in the 30s, somewhere like that, in the 1930s, with Michael's grandfather or someone at a dance, where this is where, so the point of it is this curse of Thorn has happened previously. And that's what the book does establish. And while it's not mentioned in the original John Carpenter film, it does establish that in the novel. So there's a little bit of a basis for what actually goes on in this film, which I personally thought was pretty cool. I mean, if you're going to go back and try to explain the origins of Michael Myers, what better way than to tie it back to some of the stuff that was in the novel that was not in the film, in the original film? It's actually a pretty fucking cool idea, really, in my opinion, at least. So we find out this cult has been hiding Michael, and it's been hiding Jamie Lloyd, the little girl from Halloween's 4 and 5, for all these years after they liberated Michael from the police station. And it starts off with Jamie as, I assume, a teenager by this point. Maybe 17 or 18 years old, giving birth to another baby. She escapes the asylum with the help of a nurse, and is hunted down. She's chased by Michael. She, unbeknownst to us, leaves her baby at a bus station, and then proceeds to lead Michael away to a point where he kills her on a weed thresher. He impales her on a weed thresher, which, by the way, is a pretty brutal scene, actually, to be honest with you. Thus ending the arc of Jamie Lloyd. Now, what happens is, in between, we are also introduced to the fact that Tommy Doyle, the little boy from the first movie, still in Haddonfield, living in a boarding house across the street from the Strode home, from the Myers home, which is now the Strode home. Apparently, John Strode's brother had moved his family into this house because nobody could sell it. Pardon me, I need a drink. How unprofessional of me. But at any rate, he had moved his family into this home. So Laurie's adoptive aunt and uncle and cousins live there now, along with her cousin, this one girl named Kara Strode, who has a son of her own, Danny. And then, of course, there is a younger brother. They all, I assume, are in college, because that's where Kara is going, and that's where all the other students seem to be going. I guess it's a Haddonfield College at this point, because it doesn't really seem to be high school. And Tommy lives across the street in this boarding house with the Strode brothers' girlfriend lives there as well. It's very unclear. It's only like one line of dialogue that establishes that this girl, Beth, and Tommy live in this house across the street. At any rate, he hears her call into a radio program, which was supposed to be a Howard Stern-like role, a shock jock kind of thing. And actually, as I understand, Howard Stern was up for the part, but something didn't work out, and he didn't end up in the film. At any rate, he goes and tracks down where the baby is at the bus station, brings it back, starts talking to Loomis. Slowly and surely, the plot starts revolving around them trying to find this baby, the Cult of the Thorn, and Michael trying to find this baby, and this baby becoming the final familial sacrifice of Michael and the Curse of the Thorn. And the concept is now that since Kara and Danny live in this house, Danny is also hearing voices as well, which is supposedly, again, retroactively added in, something Michael heard as well to kill for him, which was, again, the cult of the Thorn initiating this. So the concept is basically we're looking to pass the torch from the Curse of Thorn from Michael to Danny, who would, of course, take up the sacrifices of this Celtic cult. That being said, the film has some bright spots to it, without a doubt. It's the first film Paul Rudd was in. Paul Rudd, Ant-Man. There you go. At any rate, it has some bright spots. I mean, the acting is not bad. The story is as good as it's going to get, mainly because we're 6 films in. We're dealing with Michael hunting down his niece's kid. It's kind of thin at this point. They're stretching the plot a little thin on where, hunting down and killing his relatives. And his adoptive sister's cousins. So we're stretching it a little thin on the fact that he's trying to kill his family off. So, like I said, it kind of wears a little thin in just that concept. That being said, the idea of the runestones and the thorn and the cult is actually fairly interesting and fairly cool and fairly good. The problem we have with the theatrical release is, like I said, the original plot did not test well, and Donald Pleasance had died, so they had to reshoot it. And they do use a lot of that footage over again, and quite honestly, there's a lot of the film that is scene for scene exactly the same. by the end of the film, we have Kara and Danny and the baby Steven and Tommy all fighting to stop Michael. They get him in this laboratory with this tanks of fetuses, which is never really clearly explained. They're trying to get this curse transferred over. Michael goes a little ballistic and kills all the cult members and has tracked down our 4 surviving members. Dr. Loomis was unconscious. Dr. Wynn, who had been part of the facility and the cult leader, had knocked him out in the office. Dr. Wynn is also the man in black, by the way. Spoiler alert, okay? But at any rate, the film ends with them pumping Michael full of all these chemicals and needles, and Paul Rudd beating the shit out of him with a pipe, which is a pretty fucking weak ending, no matter how you cut it. I mean, the beating is like goo comes out of the mask, but it's all quick cuts, and you're never quite sure whether the concept is he killed Michael or whether. But it's a pretty fucking weak ending, no matter what. And it ends with Tommy, Kara, Danny, and Steven leaving Haddonfield. Dr. Loomis telling them to leave Haddonfield, and him saying he has to stay to take care of one more thing. We hear Loomis' scream. We cut to a pumpkin on a jack-o'-lantern on a porch, and the wind blows out the candle, and that's how the movie ends. It's a very fucking weak ending. Really, really seriously weak ending. That being said, what's the difference in the producer's cut? You would think to yourself, since I've already said to you that most of it is pretty much the same movie, what is the difference? The difference revolves around the runestones, the runestone story. Like a runestone? No, that has nothing to do with it. Anyway, it revolves around the runestones. Tommy has really worked out the plan that there's these runestones and the Curse of Thorn and all this. He's kind of worked everything out more or less. And what we do see as a difference is in the beginning of the film, Jamie. In the beginning of the film, Jamie is killed off on a weed thresher. In the producer's cut, Jamie actually survives till the second act of the film in the hospital. She's only stabbed with a knife. She's not impaled on a weed thresher. So she actually lingers on throughout it, and it kind of gives us a little more backstory about that. We are led to the conclusion that the child is actually Michael's, which by the way, apparently the Cult of Thorn used Michael to have sex with his niece so that they could have a kid to sacrifice, to be the final familiar sacrifice to pass this Curse of Thorn on to Danny. Okay, really? At any rate, so we've brought incest into the family in the Myers home. Well, I mean, it's already a mess. Why not go there? But at any rate, she lingers on in the hospital. There's some flashbacks that kind of give us more to the backstory of that. And the man in black shows up with a gun and a silencer and shoots her in the head and kills her. Kind of an unceremonious way, but realistically, getting rid of the character they were already unceremoniously dumping her. Yes, her first death is more spectacular, but the producer's cut actually helps you expand a little bit on the story. So I actually like that a little bit better, to say the least. We also have the story of the runes is kind of more expanded on, and what ends up happening is as Michael is chasing them, Tommy puts down the runestones in a circle, cuts his hand, smears the blood on, and commands Michael to stop as he's choking him, which means Michael is trapped in the circle of runestones. Which, I get it. The test audiences thought this was a really stupid ending, that it's just, hey, he's beaten by a few rocks. And I get it. I do get it. I mean, it makes more sense story-wise, honestly. I think it makes better sense story-wise. I think it's a better ending than beating the shit out of him with a pipe, which doesn't really make any sense in any fashion from these things. Clearly, at this point in the movie, you are establishing that Michael Myers' strength, agility, rage, anger, all these elements that make him more than a human has been established as being part of this Curse of the Thorn. It's a magical element to it, and it's a little weird. I mean, I will admit, but that was the explanation they were going with. And honestly, once you've gone down that path, that this is going to be a magical element to it that provides him this strength and this abilities, you really kind of have to go with there needs to be a magical solution to it. A pipe beating is not a magical solution, unless it was a magical pipe, but I don't think it was. Maybe it was a crack pipe. No, it was actually a big piece of metal piping. But apparently, I guess the revised ending, the theatrical ending, was written by someone who was heavily using a crack pipe because, hey, let's just pick up a pipe and beat up a guy who has been shot, blown up, stabbed, electrocuted, because honestly they did electrocute him in this movie as well, because he sticks a knife through the Strode father and into the electrical panel, and he's holding onto it, so that should have been an electrocution. But essentially, we're talking about a character who's been unkillable, and now we're just going to beat him up with a pipe. Yeah, okay. That makes perfect sense, That weren't able to kill him with guns and explosives, but we beat him up with a pipe, and Paul Rudd's magic pipe. Anyway, so while I understand the disappointment with test audiences, I honestly think the Rune ending is a better ending. It also kind of finishes up around the same way with Tommy and Kara and Steven and Danny leaving town, Dr. Loomis telling them to leave town. Dr. Loomis does go back in, and he finds Michael laying in the circle of runes. He goes into the circle, pulls the mask off, and it's not Michael. It's Dr. Wynn. Dr. Wynn grabs him by the hand and says, "The game is yours now," and transfers the thorn that's on his arm to Dr. Loomis's arm. Now, I'm going to stop and say something right there. So either direction, either producer's cut or theatrical cut. Clearly, Donald Pleasance is a very old man at this point, and he clearly would not be around forever. So the story itself has this massive flaw in it, in the concept that Dr. Wynn, who looks younger than Dr. Loomis, is retiring not only from the hospital and wants Loomis to replace him, but also retiring as head of the Thorn and keeper of Michael's secrets and protector of Michael in between films. He's retiring from all this and passing it on to Loomis. A guy who is way older and clearly not going to be around that long. So to me, that's always been a major flaw in that. Why would this even be a point where you would transfer this over to him? So at any rate, in this point in the film, in the producer's cut, Loomis screams as he sees the thorn come onto his things. We cut to the pumpkin, the jack-o'-lantern, the light blows out, and that's how it is. Now, what's the better cut of the film? I mean, honestly, both are a little disappointing at points. I'm not going to lie. I think the producer's cut makes more sense story-wise. I think traditionally, I guess most audiences would probably be happier with a more action-packed ending than Michael stopped with stones. But overall, I think the producer's cut probably gives us a better story, even if it's not as action-packed. On an overall basis, I actually do not hate Michael. I do not hate Halloween, the Curse of Michael Myers. I don't hate in either form, theatrical or producer's cut. I don't hate either form of it. I think both are pretty good. I think the better of the two is probably the producer's cut, if you can get a hold of it, which isn't hard to do. You just buy it on eBay. It's no longer an underground cult thing anymore. It's no longer a cult thing. It's no longer a bootleg thing anymore. And the bootleg is a very, very horrible and shitty quality. I bought it because I'm a fan and I wanted to see it, but I was very thankful it was eventually released as a regular cut. So, on an overall basis, I can't really crap on Halloween Curse of Michael Myers. It's not the best film ever. It's certainly not. Like I said, the plot is stretched pretty thin, that he's hunting down people who are his sisters, adoptive families, cousins, which sounds like the line from Spaceballs where he's like, your roommates, brothers, was. That's what it sounds like at this point. The plot points were pretty weak, and the base. I should say the plot points. The basis of the film was pretty weak and pretty hard to come up with a connection to the other films. That being said, it's really not that bad of a film. I mean, it's enjoyable. It's at least decent to watch. Like I said, the producer's cut is a little bit better to watch. Actually, I think I prefer it over the theatrical cut. There's some genuinely great scenes. There's some amazing scenes in both the producer's cut and the theatrical cut of Donald Pleasence delivering his "he was evil, pure evil" line. You know, the super dramatic Donald Pleasence just doling out this lines about how evil, the heart of evil, the darkness. You know, he's amazing. As a final performance, you could see that clearly he could still act. Paul Rudd is a little rough. I'm not going to say he is the perfect leading man in this film. I think he was still very young, very new to the industry, and I don't think he had found his niche yet, which I don't think horror was his real niche. I think we obviously know at this point Paul Rudd's comedy is a better suit for him than horror. I do enjoy Marianne Hager. Marianne. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like Maria Anna, Anne Hager. I thought she was very good, actually. A very different character for the franchise, and a very different character for, I think, a lot of horror franchises. She's a single mother who has had to move back home and deal with her abusive father and deal with raising a child, which is kind of different. I mean, I appreciate characters that are a little different, a little new in a franchise. I mean, certainly, they took a chance on her, and I think it paid off well. I think she was very decent in the role. I understand there was some criticism about her from the studios and in the production team choosing her, about her being too skinny and her face being too pointy, which I think is fucking ridiculous. She's a very beautiful woman. But I think she is very capable. I would have liked to have seen more of their story, in another film. But clearly, after the disappointment of the box office from this film, it was never going to happen. And of course, we end up going to Halloween H2O after this, where Jamie Lee Curtis returns. So clearly, they were never going to return to those characters. But overall, I really do enjoy